Well, I think the crisis between Qatar and this Arab bloc, apparently now including the United States, at least President Trump, who's rather decisively taken their side, really has been brewing for a long time. And I think there are multiple specific causes that have to do with the grievances that the United States has apparently asked for a specific set of from Saudi Arabia. But I think that the basic point overall is the sense, especially among the Saudis and the Emiratis, but also the Egyptians. But for the Saudis and the Emiratis, it's much more personal because they are nominally not only friends but partners and allies within the GCC of Qatar. That Qatar's foreign policy and especially its soft power projection through its media and other forms of soft power, who it gives money to, who it hosts, there's everything that it does within the range of soft power, undermines their national interests. And it's particularly, I think, an ideological and an ideational argument. The Qatar stands for and promotes a series of things, of ideas and ideologies in the Arab world and in the Middle East that undermine everything they're trying to do. The longest standing complaint is about Al Jazeera and all the other websites and news stations and sort of manifestations of Qatari communications, soft power, and propaganda in the region that begins with Al Jazeera from the first days being very oriented towards Arab nationalism and even more Islamism, and particularly the Muslim Brotherhood. And then that sort of metastasizes out, and particularly after the overthrow of former President Morsi in Egypt has added on a more robust Arab nationalist component that's with the Al-Arab al-Jadid and things like that, which focus more on, let's say, an Azmi Bishara centered discourse rather than a Qaradawi centered discourse. So you have both now. And all of that is particularly galling to the Emirates, which take the opposite view from the Qataris, that rejects political Islam and Islamized politics entirely. Saudi Arabia is a little bit more nuanced, but they object to this too. I think for the Saudis, the focus is more on the second front, which is Qatar's relations with Iran. I think everybody understands that Qatar shares the North Field, what Iran calls the South Par, this giant natural gas field with Iran, and has to maintain decent relations with it. But Qatar has a very long history, going back to the old idea of the axis of resistance and supporting Hamas, which has continuously tried to have one foot in the Arab camp and one foot in the Iranian camp, good relations with Hezbollah and constantly promoting them, and a bunch of things that are definitely true that have given Qatar a qualitative role in helping Iran in its regional agenda that's different from, say, Oman's more neutral sort of mediation role or Kuwait's closer relations with Iran. I think that the idea that there's no space in the GCC for having different policies towards Iran is not viable. It relies on the listener not knowing that Oman is the closest of all to Iran and that Kuwait definitely has good relations with Iran. And even the Emirates is not wholly hostile to Iran. There are a lot of business in Dubai and things like that. It's more the specific role the Qataris have played. And what this is about another attempt to try to shift their policies. The context is complex and specific. I'm not going to go into it because you haven't asked me that. But that is what this is about. It is about trying to get Qatar to stop doing a bunch of things that it has been doing increasingly over the past 15 years, and especially since 2014. Now, how do I think this will end? Well, I don't think there's too much doubt about it, although it could take many different forms and it could be prolonged or quick. And the impact could be very long-ranging or it could be unlimited. We've been through this before in 2014 when the Emiratis, the Saudis, and the Bahrainis cut diplomatic relations with Qatar and basically compelled them to sign an agreement which is the contents of which are not public and are disputed between the two sides. But basically, the other countries left with the impression that Qatar had agreed to tone down its support for the Brotherhood, rein in some of the demagogues it supports, expel certain people or muzzle them, etc. A whole bunch of things that either barely happened or didn't happen at all. And so there's this really strong sense that they went through this one time before and they signed an agreement, and this agreement has been unfulfilled. And one of the reasons that they're being so tough on closing the borders and on creating almost a blockade. It's not a siege exactly, but really sort of a total isolation is a better way of putting it on Qatar, is that they don't want to go through 2014 again. They're not going to agree that Qatar just signs a piece of paper that's vague, apparently, many people say, or that they have is subject to wildly different interpretations. That's definitely true of 2014, where the Qataris have one opinion about what they signed and everybody else another. They're not going through that again. They're demanding some tangible things. And what exactly they're going to ask for and what they get in order to solve this is not clear. But I think the idea that Qatar can survive on its own in splendid isolation and tolerate this, particularly with the American president essentially siding with the Arab bloc that's confronting it, is not plausible. Iran is not going to come to their rescue. They are not going to become a client of Iran. If they try, I believe that will be prevented, not merely by the Arab states, but by the United States. And I think the notion that Turkey could provide an out overestimates Turkey's ability, its interest in this, and which is ideological, but Turkey is a little bit busy right now with internal affairs and Kurdish issues. And I think it overestimates their ability to project power in the region. They can certainly help the Qataris, but they cannot save the Qataris. So the question isn't, in my view, will Qatar shift and bend? They will. The question is how far, for how long, and at what price? And those are all to be seen. Does this signal the end of the Gulf Cooperation Council? No, I don't think so. There are at least two other phases of escalation that could be employed by the bloc that's confronting Qatar. One would be expulsion from the GCC, which has been discussed, but there's no effort to implement it. It's a threat that's out there, and I think it's really not at all what the Emiratis and Saudis are going for. I think they stand accused of fostering disunity, and people are saying, well, the GCC is disunited and all that. Well, okay, that, so objectively speaking, that's obviously true. But it was also obviously true that because the crisis was brewing for so long, it wasn't united anyway. And I think from the Saudi and Qatari and Emirati point of view, they're looking for unity worthy of the name. That's how they look at it. I mean, they think that Qatar, unlike Oman and Kuwait, was not having an independent policy, which they can live with, but having a policy that undermined their national interests and the collective interests, and they won't put up with it. I tend to think that because Qatar is so dependent in fundamental ways, I mean, not really financially, but in all kinds of other ways on its neighbors, and doesn't really have any viable options, especially if the Americans either side with the other side or even remain neutral and let the other side go forward with their pressure without trying to convince them to stop without getting anything, that they're going to have to bend. And if they bend, I think the GCC can go back to what it has been, a loose confederation that agrees on some things and has a very great heterogeneity built into it on the other hand. And what this underscores, and this is my final point, is that is a very important defining reality in the Middle East, which is that Iran and its alliance is quite well integrated, and they tend to cooperate with each other very well. They all follow the lead of Tehran. There isn't a lot of disunity within it. There aren't a lot of mavericks functioning. Of course, it's easier when you're an anti-status quo power. If the Houthis go and do something crazy, the Iranians really don't mind. And the fact that the Iranians don't have that much control over the Houthis, increasing influence, yes, but that's sort of not a problem for that alliance in a way. But look at say, the strength of the subservience of the Assad regime, an Arab nationalist, nominally one, with the Iranian theocrats and with Hezbollah and others. And I mean, you see a great deal of unity there. On the other side, on the anti-Iranian camp, you have utter disunity. It's the only thing they agree on. Really difficulties between the Turks and the Arabs, between the Turks and the Israelis, between the Israelis and the Arabs, and even within the Arab bloc, inside the Gulf and inside the GCC. So this is not going to change that. And that is a fundamental reality, that the bloc confronting Iran is much bigger and much more powerful, but much, much less unified. Whereas Iran's camp is smaller and weaker, but very unified and responds quite well to dictates from the top in most cases.